Austria-Hungary as a multi-ethnic country didn't really make any sense. The Austrian and the Hungarian portion were practically two independent countries, only tied by a common monarch. I want to tell you why Austria-Hungary was set on the path of collapse, no matter the circumstances. They can only prolong their survival, but I don't think they can prevent it. In this alternate history, Austria-Hungary would win the Great War and expand into the Balkans, but also they would form a South Slavic crown named Illyria. In this episode, shit would hit the fan as Austria-Hungary would completely disintegrate. Welcome to Project Kaisertum episode 7, which is point of divergence is in 1914, with Germany capturing Paris and winning the Great War 2 years later. Let me show you what I came up with. I already mentioned the main problem of the empire, which was that it was multi-ethnic. This wasn't a big problem back in the day, as the Romanian people, for example, didn't have a country that they could call their own. A similar situation is the one with the Polish people in Austria-Hungary prior to the Great War. The Poles didn't have their own Polish nation, so they wouldn't cause problems in Austria-Hungary. The thing is that when the Central Powers won the Great War in this alternate timeline, a Polish nation was created. Naturally, the Poles of Austria-Hungary wanted to join their respective nation, which problem would be the same as the Italians in Austria-Hungary, but also the before mentioned Romanians, Ukrainians and Serbo-Croatians. This is not to mention the Czech and Slovaks, who didn't have a country of their own, but they desired independence, or at least autonomy, and their own crown under Austria-Hungary. The problem in this alternate history, despite Austria-Hungary winning the war, still remains the same. So, unless Austria-Hungary directly annexes these nations and turns them into a separate crown, their collapse is pretty much guaranteed. To top it all off, the Hungarians are disloyal. This is because, as to create a South Slavic crown, the Hungarians had to cede lands to the Illyrians. They would of course demand compensation, which can be either with territory or with money. Regarding the territory, Hungary can realistically expand into Romania, as during the 1300s they owned Wallachia and Moldavia as puppet states, so they have a historical claim. The Austrians would of course refuse this, so a monetary compensation is theoretically possible between the Hungarians and the Austrians. As I said in the previous episode, Austria would be forced to choose between keeping Hungary or keeping Illyria, but trying to keep both would risk the whole empire to collapse. To outline it again, this is because if Austria were to pay the Hungarians from their own coffer, they may suffer economic hardships. So, Austrian regions like Tyrol, Istria and the entirety of Galicia may leave the empire as they are not Austrian nor Hungarian, but are forced to pay for the creation of the South Slavic crown. That has nothing to do with them. Even worse, if the Austrian portion were to pay, this would be a great insult, because the Galicians would have to pay for it, despite them wanting their own crown and autonomy. So, if Austria were to pay Hungary for their loss of territory, they would need to reform massively and add a possible Galician and Czech crowns, making the country a penta-monarchy. This doesn't sound too appealing, so the other alternative is that Austria forces Illyria to pay for the lands that they took from Hungary. While this would prevent the collapse of the Austrian portion, this would guarantee that Illyria becomes significantly poorer and more radical. If the Illyrians are forced to pay the Hungarians, this might antagonize the South Slavs and only increase their independence desire. Looking at this situation, Austria is in between a rock and a hard place, as they practically have to choose between losing their own territories but keeping the empire intact, or losing Illyria and also Serbia-Montenegro. The other option is that Austria ignores the Hungarian demands, which would make them leave the empire. There is no right choice, so if you were to play the Hearts of Iron 4 mod as Austria, you will be able to have all of these tough choices and see what they would lead to. Now that we understand the politics and the problems of Austria-Hungary and Illyria, let's see what the course of action would be. In the previous episode, I said that the Hungarians would openly riot and seize properties owned by ethnic Austrians as a form of reparation for their Croatian holdings. This would be in fact the beginning of the end for Austria-Hungary and Illyria. Last time that the Hungarians rebelled was in 1848, and this rebellion was mostly put down by Russian soldiers, as 300,000 of them were sent to help Austria. After that, the Hungarian portion of the empire was put under martial law up until 1867, when there was a Hungarian compromise and the formation of Austria-Hungary. I'm telling you all of this as there was definitely hatred towards the Austrians in Hungary. After all, their lands were under martial law for whole 19 years. Now, in the Hungarian perspective, Austria stole land from them and gave it to Illyria, without paying the Hungarians in any way. This is why I think Hungary would want to leave the Austrians, but they would try to reclaim their Croatian lands in the process. There would be a war between Austria and Illyria, who would face the Hungarians. I said war between Austria and Illyria, which is not the literal sense of the word. Austria would want to pacify the Hungarians and keep the status quo, while Illyria would want to punish the Hungarians and take South Slavic lands from the Hungarian portion, mainly Vojvodina and Banat. Since the two allies of Austria and Illyria would have major disagreements on how to deal with the Hungarians, any cooperation between the two would be very ineffective, hence why the Hungarians can perform so well in this war. The French ultranationalist state would support the Hungarians, at least diplomatically, as the French would want to weaken the former Central Powers. This would be followed by the Russians, who this time will not take the role as the protectors of the Slavic people, as they would allow Hungary free reign over Slovakia and the South Slavic lands. Germany's response to this would be mixed. Some would see it as an opportunity to take Austria and Bohemia, while others would want to keep the status quo, as a major empire disappearing would change the balance of power in the region quite a lot. Due to these mixed German responses, no official statement would be made in the first key moments of the civil war. Regarding the Austrian minorities, they would quickly seize the opportunity to also declare their independence, claiming it as their right to join their neighboring countries. This would be first seen with the Italians in South Tyrol and Istria, who would form the independent countries of Italian Trentino and Italian Istria respectively. These countries would secure their independence quite effectively, as they are far away from the action, but also Austria would not retaliate against them, out of fear that Italy might defend them and join the opposite side. As a result, these two Italian states would be de facto independent, but not be recognized by any other country. Not so long after that, they would vote to join the Kingdom of Italy, which, while being neutral and kind of isolationist, would accept them. This would also satisfy Austria, as this would prevent the Italians from joining the opposing side and maybe taking the Adriatic coast by force. The Poles and Ukrainians would also do something similar, as these people would rebel and want to join their respective countries. The problem was that there was no clear border, so the Poles would claim this land as theirs, while the Ukrainians would claim this land as theirs. While this is going on, France and Russia would covertly support Poland, as the country is led by Cyril I, the fourth son of Ferdinand I of Bulgaria. Technically, Poland is not a German puppet politically, but they are very tied to them economically. Of course, France and Russia would not announce their support publicly or send too much equipment to Poland, as to not cause any suspicion. The Austrian Empire is really starting to crumble, and even the Czechs are rebelling and have full control over the cities of Pilsen and Prague, but not Brno and the countryside. The Romanians would see their biggest opportunity, as they would want to seize ethnic Romanian lands in Transylvania and Banat, so the arrival of Hungary would be in a very vulnerable state. The thing is that the Romanians cannot just join the war and annex some free land. This is because if they do without the consent of Austria, it could be seen as the Romanians stealing Austrian land. Now, let us be real, the Romanians are very good at stealing, so it's possible to happen. Jokes aside, Austria would want to return to the status quo, which is looking increasingly unlikely. Still, Romania has good relations with the Salonika Pact, containing Albania, Greece and Bulgaria. Their goal is to prevent any great power from controlling the Balkans, so they would stay united as to keep the foreign invaders out. Bulgaria was promised future control over Serbia-Montenegro, excluding Kosovo, which would go to Albania. This promise was made by the Greeks during the wars of Turkish collapse in 1925, so 5 years prior to that. The Romanians and the Bulgarians, but also the Albanians, would have an interest to strike the Habsburg monarchy and seize their land. The Greeks are not so enthusiastic about this, so they would negotiate to stay out of the conflict, just because they want to consolidate their new gains and not risk losing them. This is why I would say that there is quite a lot for the Salonika Pact to gain, making their involvement to the upset of Austria and Illyria inevitable. At this point, Germany is really scratching its head, as just like how the Ottoman Empire, their former ally in the Great War, collapsed, the same fate is upon the Habsburg monarchy. This is important, as despite the Ottoman Empire's collapse, Germany managed to secure good relations with all of its breakaway states. So Germany maneuvered the situation quite perfectly. I mention this because of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which is a net positive for the Germans, as they gained new allies and lost a bit of land to Russia. There was no need for Germany to involve itself and try to save the Ottoman Empire, which would make a coalition to form against them. This situation to me is quite similar, so the Germans can make sure to have good relations with all the states that would be involved in the war and not have to help Austria out in this ridiculous war. The war would progress as the Polish rebels would be supported by the Polish kingdom. The Austrians will now risk a war with Poland if they retaliate against the Polish rebels, so the situation for Austria is becoming too tricky. Now, if you remember initially, the Ukrainians are led by Archduke Wilhelm of Austria, better known as Vasil Vyshevani. Despite him being a Habsburg, he was a Ukrainian nationalist and would take this chance to expand his nation. Considering the situation, I don't think that it's too crazy to suggest that Ukraine enters this war formally. After about a week of warfare, I see Bulgaria completely overrunning Serbia-Montenegro, where the people would be enthusiastic to get rid of the Habsburg leader, but their future under Bulgaria is also uncertain. I also see Romania making solid gains in Transylvania, while the Hungarians are holding both the Austrians and suppressing any possible Slovak uprisings. Austria is also trying to keep Bohemia intact, so they're not too effective in this war. Finally, I see Poland and Ukraine to occupy Galicia, but they will soon have an argument regarding the exact borders. At that point, Austria would need a humiliating peace treaty, where they would at least keep something, while the Hungarians also want peace with Austria, as they want to focus on Romania. This is how the peace treaties would look like, which would be mediated in Berlin. The Poles are going to get most of Galicia, including the city of Lvov, while Ukraine would get a smaller part of the region, but they would be promised a lot of future Russian land. The Ukrainians should take the deal, as they rely on Germany for protection against the Russians, so they have no choice. Regarding the Balkans, Illyria would take the opportunity to break free. They could theoretically remain under the Habsburgs, but the South Slavs would not benefit from this. I see Illyria becoming a free kingdom, with a king being possible to come from the House of Savoy, which is the Italian one. The Italians can not only gain Trentino and Istria, but also a protectorate over the kingdom of Illyria. This is because the Bulgarians have annexed Serbia-Montenegro, which I'm yet to mention. This would force the Illyrians to be initially isolated, so the Italian protection would help them against Austria and Bulgaria. In reality, this is not just a guarantee of independence by Italy, but the Italians would have ambitions to seize some of their lands and puppet the nation, which is already in the process as there is a potential Savoy candidate on the throne of Illyria. As I said, Bulgaria and Albania would partition Serbia-Montenegro, where I assume that the Serbians would not integrate too well in these countries, so they would cause problems and paralyze them from within. Austria would end up keeping Bohemia and renaming itself to Austria-Bohemia, and they would use this cool flag that somebody made on Reddit. As for the Hungarians, they would continue their war with Romania, where the Hungarians would want total victory. The Romanians would be supported by the Salonika Pact, who would wish to include Romania into their alliance, consolidate power and remain neutral from foreign affairs. I think it's fair to say that the Hungarians would be on the losing side in these circumstances, but out of pride they would not sign a peace treaty that would make them lose land. Eventually, the Romanians would occupy most of Transylvania and threaten to take the city of Cluj. At that point, the Hungarian parliament would vote to end the war, as if they continue, they would lose even more territory. Still, the Hungarians would keep northern Transylvania and most notably, the Hungarian populated areas in Brasov. This is also called Jekili land, referred to this area in our timeline. The Hungarians would be forced to peace out, as the Slovaks would also rebel, but also the South Slavs, so it would be a suicide mission for Hungary to keep this war going. After the peace treaty is signed, the parliament in Hungary would be dismissed and the military would take over. They would suppress any possible rebellions and swear to destroy Romania and retake Transylvania. Hungary would become a brutal police state, which would be similar in ideology to France and Russia, making them a natural ally of these countries. The French and Russians would also seek revenge, just like the Hungarians. Additionally, these countries have very similar enemies, which is Germany. I think that the French, Russians and Hungarians would formally ally, signing the Axis of Paris, Budapest and Moscow, or just the Axis of Revenge for shorter. The Germans would protest this alliance and force them to dissolve, which would obviously happen and we would all live a happy and prosperous life. No, they would not dissolve. So, what's next? Well, I think that Germany would be fairly concerned. So far, the Germans only have a customs union, which is an economic alliance, but the Germans lack a military alliance. Most notably, Germany would do something that would forever change the course of this alternate world. As to protect Austria-Bohemia and make sure that they don't fall to any extremist ideologies, or fall victim to the Hungarian aggression, Austria-Bohemia would be puppeted by Germany. In a way, they would be independent, but practically they're economically and militarily tied to Germany. I don't see the Germans directly annexing them, as this would create more harm than good. For example, the Habsburgs would still rule Austria-Bohemia, with Charles I possibly remaining in charge, but I doubt it. The thing is that the Ukrainian king is also a Habsburg, so if Germany were to annex Austria-Bohemia, this would break the personal union between them and Ukraine. Now, I think that even if this were to happen, I don't think that the Ukrainians would want to leave and go down their own path, as they would be quickly invaded by Russia in this case. Still, mostly in order to keep legitimacy and their good image, Germany would puppet Austria-Bohemia. This German expansion, although not officially seen as annexing, is practically the same. Austria-Bohemia would fight on the side of Germany and contribute their soldiers to the German army, as the two countries would have a shared army and economy. This would greatly upset the Axis of Revenge, who would in turn demand that Austria-Bohemia remains a free country. The German side, however, would not back down and keep their position, while starting to improve relations with the Italians and the Salonika Pact. Italy would actually declare official neutrality, as they don't want to be part of any future wars. This is understandable, as they're in the process of getting all of Illyria, but also the Italians got pretty much everything that they could ever want in the continent of Europe, uniting most of the Italian speakers under one country. There is basically nothing for Italy to gain, but everything to lose in a potential war. The Salonika Pact would invite Romania, as they want to better protect themselves from Hungarian and Italian aggressions in the Balkan Peninsula. The French would see that their threat was not taken by Germany too seriously, so they would make an even bigger demand. The French would demand that Germany leaves Austria-Bohemia, but most importantly Alsace-Lorraine. If this is not done by the 1st of September 1932, the Axis of Revenge would be in a state of war with the Germans. This may seem odd, but it's actually the only chance for France and Russia to topple the German hegemony and their only chance to reclaim their lost territories. The French have also been producing a lot of super heavy tanks, with the idea that once they're built, they would never be destroyed and can be used indefinitely, allowing France to win despite less resources. The war plan of France would be to use their tanks to capture Strasbourg and cross the Rhine River, while also going along the Maas River and to cut Belgium away from Germany, which can be later safely taken. France also knows that Italy is content with their gains and that they will not get involved, while Spain is too divided politically between the ultranationalists and the socialists, just like how France was a few years prior. This means that France can only focus on Germany. Now, Germany would call the bluff of France and not pull out of Austria-Bohemia and Alsace-Lorraine, so France and Germany would be in a state of war. Very quickly, this war would include Russia on the French side, going against Germany and all of its puppet states. I will finish this alternate Second World War in the next episode. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it out. Watch the video on the screen and I wish you the best day possible. Goodbye.